Hello, we are the Voices of Experience, four pals from Toronto, Canada, all of us with quite a few miles traveled already down life's highway. While that may not translate directly into voices of wisdom, we can promise you an entertaining half hour of discussion on a wide range of topics of current interest. So, sojourn with us for a while. You'll hear a variety of points of view. You'll be amused, you'll be provoked, you'll be stimulated. And now it's my pleasure to pass the word along to Al Brown. Al?
Thank you very much, Andrew. Welcome, everyone. My name is Al Brown, and joining me today is Saurabh Sandhu, Mario Kyriakides, and our introducer, Andrew Wood. Today's subject of this podcast is a cultural phenomenon that goes back beyond prehistory. There are there's archaeological elements of this cultural icon going back 10,000 years, but based on indigenous experiences right now, it's likely that this cultural activity of ours, of the human race, goes back tens of thousands of years to the time when we first became communal creatures living in hunter-gathering tribes. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not talking about some of the 8 oldest professions in the world. I am talking about alcohol, beer, wine, and spirits. Historically, back indigenous tribes today, and they probably did tens of thousands of years ago, they would make alcoholic beverages by fermenting fruits and whatever plants they could find in the environment. Now, at that time, this alcoholic beverage, which probably has rather dubious quality, was used mostly for ceremonial purposes. It wasn't until the time of settled society we started making things that would look anything like the alcohol we have of today. In this regard, some sort of rice beer was made in China maybe 10,000 years ago. And then about 7,000 years ago, with the production or the growing of barley in settled cultures in Mesopotamia, we have what we now call beer. Wine is the poster child of the alcohol industry. It did not come along until about 2,000 years later. And it originated or is considered to have originated in the state of Georgia on the east side of the Black Sea, emanating out across Western Europe, being carried by the Phoenicians to all corners of Europe, and ultimately back through the Middle East to Asia. So now we have today something that we are participating in, a cultural activity that has so deep a roots in us, in our culture, that we hardly think about it. Have you ever thought where your alcohol started to come from? Today we're going to talk about our favorite brews, and I'm going to throw in a bit of snippets of history as we go along to tell everyone some of the history behind alcohol, what our ancestors used it for, how they used it, and where the major innovations came along. I'd like to ask others in this group what their favorite brew is, or wine, or distilled spirits, or what their favorite national beverage happens to be. Mario, Greece has a long history involved with wine, beer, and other alcoholic beverages. Tell us what you like.
Do Greeks really have a history of drinking? I wonder. I don't know about that ouzo that we were having a couple of days ago. I don't know, man. It's one of those things. But I got to tell you something. My favorite is right now that I'm drinking right now with you. I don't want to do an advertisement, so I'll just do it like this because it is Stella. Stella. That's what I'm drinking. And I'm drinking it out of a mug from Cheers. I don't know if you guys can see that. There it is. So just for those of you who have traveled as long as we have in life, you probably remember this show. and Sam Malone. So here's to you, Sam and Diane.
Cheers.
Cheers. But let me tell you something. Al, when they're doing his introduction, he was starting to talk about the elements of different cultural and alcoholic beverages and all that. And I heard, for some reason, elephants. So maybe this thing is more than it's saying of 5% alcohol. I don't know, because I just started to hear things. Or maybe it's the residue of that ouzo that I was drinking, because it does have a little bit of a carryover for a few days. That's why we dance and walk so funny, so you guys can know. But as Greeks, we know the value of a good time. We know the value of work, and we know the value of combining both of those things. The Italian call it the dolce vita, the good life, living the good life. And alcohol is part of that if done in moderation. Because we say something in Greek that I've said to you guys before, which is pan metron ariston. Everything in moderation is perfect. So if you're doing it that way, and you're in some good company with a lot of other Greeks who understand how to use alcohol properly and enjoy a good time. Yes, Sarah. And Sarah is muted. Maybe the hearing is going too. Hello, Sarah. Can you hear us?
Yeah, loud and clear.
All right, Sarah.
Okay, my question is, everybody, hello, and thank you for the podcast. My question is, why do you drink? I know you have to be in moderate, but what is the reason people drink? What does it do to your body?
Well, I can give you a bit of the historical behind it. Alcohol has often been used as a stimulant to provide sort of you might say, a psychedelic experience. In South America, the indigenous culture there of the Incas would often use it in conjunction with some flowers that by themselves would be very poisonous, but in moderation, in small quantities, produced a dream state and allowed them to have vision. So I can imagine that thousands of years ago, when we had very little of alcohol, it was for ceremonial purposes, but it is also a stimulant. In many cultures in the past, more recently, alcohol was called liquid courage. It was given to troops before battle because it caused your inhibitions to go down, and it animated you a lot. In too much amounts, of course, it's going to cause problems. But in small amounts, it is a stimulant. So that's where it all started. And as the amount of alcohol became more commonplace, it became an item for first of luxury and then of commonplace. In addition to that, in the old days, back then, water was not always safe to drink. And what they would do is they would brew beer and drink it, or they drank wine. Because if the brew was done properly, the bad bugs that would kill you or cause you injury weren't in the fluids that you drank. In the Middle Ages in Germany, for example, everybody was allotted 2 or 3 liters of wine a day. And that was what you drank, because if you drank the water, you died. Now, of course, the German beer was very light on alcohol at the time. If you've ever tried it, they still have a tradition of wines with very low alcohol. Does that answer your question, Sarab?
Yes, but now I'm going to ask you another one. What is different between that stimulant and cannabis? What's the difference?
I think they're in a separate class.
I think they're in the same class. I am an experience that I'm asking this question is because when you have alcohol, I'm talking from the health perspective. I know the history is fine. But when you have alcohol, it does something to you. It's the number 1 drug in the world. It's called the number 1 drug. Moderation or no moderation. Cannabis has the same psychoactive effect, and yet there is no damage to the body. That's one thing. But the more on that, we're talking about alcohol today. Actually, I want to come here. Why I asked this is because somebody asked Winston Churchill about whiskey, right? And here's how he answered. This is gives the answer. If you mean whiskey, the devil's brew, the poison scourge, the bloody monster that defiles innocence, dethrones reason, destroys the home, creates misery and poverty, yeah, literally takes the bread from the mouths of little children. If you mean that evil drink that topples men and women from the pinnacles of righteous and gracious living into the bottomless pit of degradation, shame, despair, helplessness, and hopelessness, then, my friend, I'm opposed to it with every fiber of my being. However, if by whiskey you mean the oil of conversation, the philosophic wine, the elixir of life, the ale that is consumed when good fellows get together, that puts a song in their heart and a warm glow of contentment in their eyes, if you mean good cheer, the stimulating sip that puts a little spring in the step of an elderly gentleman on a frosty morning, do you mean that drink that enables man to magnify his joy and to forget life's greatest tragedies and heartbreaks and sorrow? If you mean that drink, that sale of which pours into our treasuries untold millions of pounds each year, that provides tender care to our little crippled children, are blind, are deaf, are dumb, are pitifully aged and infirm, to build the finest highways, hospitals, universities, and communities, colleges in this nation, then, my friend, I'm absolutely, unequivocally in favor of it. My position, and as always, I refuse to compromise on the matter of principle.
Cheers!
Truly a politician.
That requires a cheers. Come on.
Politician was talking on both sides of his mouth, standing on the middle of the fence. Andrew, give us your thoughts.
Well, gentlemen, you know what? Here you've been launching into your stupid podcast, and you don't even have the introductory comments from all the members on the screen here. So thank you for that. Just a second, I'm a little thirsty here. No, I'm not going to admit that this is beer. This isn't beer. No, 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 no. No, I wouldn't do that. Me and Winston Churchill, we're the same, at least from the one side of his mouth. Except, well, it's a beer-like substance. That's true. Well, I don't. Okay, so maybe it is. Okay, let me be honest. Okay, but it's only my fourth this morning, so I'm still 100% sober, perfectly able to take part in this podcast. So there we go. And clink. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Okay.
Gentlemen.
You gotta join Smoke It, man.
Yeah, well, you know what? I agree with Winston, of course. You know, that's so eloquent. Wasn't that a wonderful thing? Thank you, Saurabh, for reading that. Well, alcohol has been a boon to society in many, many ways. And certainly we have sat around a table in a pub often enough, the four of us, have we not? And,
yes.
And it's only through the tender mercies of COVID-19 that we can't continue to do so. So we look forward to the time when we can again. I'm not going to continue on, but I do want to hit as my contribution here, the fact that alcohol also causes untold misery, just untold misery, and millions of deaths and broken families, and it is a toxin. It is a toxin, and we can joke about it and we can laud its excellent qualities, but bottom line, it has caused more misery as well than any other substance known to man, I'm sure.
Well, we have lots of things in our society today that cause human misery. And I think that we all have a responsibility to use everything responsibly, not only our alcohol, but our cars, the way we throw material into the environment. All of this is very important. But with regards to alcohol, I would like to give a little more of the history of it. Mario, I alluded to the fact that Greece has a long history of alcohol. And I believe that grapes and wine were one of the first things, like Greece was one of the first places that got it after it was invented in Georgia. And we hear something about, yes, Andrew?
That's a libel. It's a libel. Everyone knows that wine is French. It comes from France, and that is where we get wine. Vive la France! Vive le vin!
Now, wait a
Okay.
minute. He said that it was invented in Georgia. That means it was invented like everything else in the United States. Isn't that true?
No, we're talking Georgia on the Black Sea.
Oh, you're talking Georgia in the Black Sea, not the okay, Georgia. Well, okay, well, I don't know about that because as being Greek, we take exception, not only the Americans, but any kind of country that tries to take away our heritage. And the grapes are Greek, and you should know that by now.
Well, I'll
Right.
tell you something. In Homer's epic, the Iliad and the Odyssey, they do talk about wine. So, and that comes from about at least 3,000 years ago. So we know back then that the Greeks had the wine. And they did something unusual back then. And actually, it comes in the Odyssey. When Odysseus was on his 20-year journey trying to get home, his wife Penelope at home had to put off all these suitors who were coming to replace him. And of course, they were drinking all the household wine. And one of the things they would always do is they take their wine and they'd cut it with water, which kind of tells me that wine must have been pretty strong back then. Or maybe it was almost like whiskey, really strong stuff. But I also read another place where the Greek men had these crazy customs when they would go on their drinking parties. The women would all go someplace else, and the guys would sit around on their divans and drink wine. And of course, the wine would come in these big cups like there. And it's not clear stuff like today. It'd be full of residue and grape seeds and all this trash stuff. And they'd swill us away, and then they'd throw all the stuff into the middle of the room where I suppose the wives had to clean up afterwards, or maybe the servants, who knows. Anyways, that is the history of it.
Well,
No,
let me add some credibility to that because it is actually very true what you said. Penelope and the rest of them were drinking watered down wine, whereas Odysseus was actually drinking pure wine, pure alcohol. What do you think he actually saw cyclopses and heard sirens for? I mean, come on. This guy was just toasted, and the proof is once you're drunk, right, and you kind of put your eyes together like that, doesn't everybody's else eye look like one single eye right here in the forehead? I mean, come on. It's proof positive that alcohol is Greek, okay? It's Greek.
Yeah, the 2-4, of course. The 24 of Labatt Blue is what it used to be. I don't buy Labatt Blue anymore, by the way. I never buy it. Because the thing is, that's industrial beer. That's another way we can turn this conversation, of course. It's because the whole production and consumption of beer over the past decade or two, it's been a little while now. It's all these micro breweries here in Canada, at least, and I'm sure elsewhere as well, have sprung up, and many of them are thriving, but there's literally hundreds of them. And when you go to the beer store now, or the LCBO, you're confronted with 100 different varieties of beer from little companies that you never heard of. And it's wonderful to have that choice from all over the world. So the production of beer and the consumption of it has been changing a lot in terms of becoming more independent. And I think that's for the better, don't you?
Yeah.
Well, Sarab, you had a word?
Yeah. You see, when on the ship, we once went to a bar in New Orleans. And it was supposed to be having beers from about 108 different countries. Actually had beers from various countries. And while we were sitting there, we went through about 37 countries. So, but I was quite surprised that they didn't have any beer from India. It's supposed to be there, but I was surprised. So I told them they have.
You shouldn't be surprised. New Orleans is very close to Georgia, after all. So.
Oh, yeah. And you're talking about burnt toast and all that. In the olden days, they used to take wine from Europe to UK or wherever. Whenever they used to go across the passage, it used to spoil for some reason. So somebody thought of a very good idea. What we will do is we'll take away the water from the wine before we ship it. For a start, we can ship more. Then we'll take it there and put water back into the wine, and we will sell it. They tried that, but they started liking the distilled wine, which is brandy. That's how the name came as brandy. They decided not to put water, it tasted awful. It was called burnt wine, is called brandy. That's how the name came.
Well, there's other types of alcohol that have been developed over time, and they all arose because of the invention of distillation. Now, people were using distillation as a way of producing essential oils or essential fluids as far back as maybe 2,000, 2,300 years. But distillation of alcohol didn't really start getting going until the invention of a few associated we started seeing a lot of the modern alcohols that you have, the whiskeys, the ouzos and Irish whiskeys and all these other drinks were available because you had high concentration alcohol, potions of alcohol. And you're talking about brandy, there's another drink that you can get called port. Now, again, port was created in Portugal, of course, and it actually consists of regular wine fortified with alcohol, which comes from the distillation of wine. So we have a lot of varieties of drink now because of that.
Well, in Greece, speaking of Portugal and the origins, in Greece we have a specific type of ouzo that is moonshine, actually. We call it tsipuro. And tsipuro is moonshine to the nth degree. I mean, this thing, and I'm not kidding you guys, is literally pure alcohol. When you put it on your lips, it evaporates. That is how potent it is. And one sip, just one little sip, can get you just flying high. So it's there, this I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and our meeting historian here, Al Brown, can probably correct me. Wasn't this created in Egypt?
Yes, the ancient Egyptians drank beer. Yes, they did. But it wasn't necessarily like our beer.
No.
You know,
it's all buried
somewhere, I think, right?
Yeah.
On your line of your special ouzo, Mario, back about 45 years ago, I went down to Jamaica and I got a bottle of this stuff called Jonkobati. Basically, it was rum made during the distillation of sugar. What they do with sugar cane is to making of sugar, they take the juice and they boil off the water. And at the same time as they're doing that, they get some alcohol that comes in. So this stuff, I got a bottle of it, cost me $1 at the time. And it was called, as I said, Jonkobati, which basically means vulture's asshole. Oh, that stuff was strong.
I bet a little bit of spliff too that you got it made, right?
Yeah. It burnt in daylight. I mean, I could put a little bit on a spoon and burn it, and you could see the blue light coming off it.
Okay, regarding this, in our village in the Punjab, so what they're having, Jonkobati, we've been having for 2,000 years. My uncle was an expert at distilling it, and it was very, very rudimentary and biblical in nature. It'll take me earthen pot made of earth. They put all the mash there, and they put another earthen pot, which is a concave, on top of that. And in between, they have a small concave earthen, and they used to boil it, and they could get about 30 bottles with one batch. And they used to do it right in the sugarcane fields. So they used to make it from sugarcane, you're right, they boil the thing. And this is a very, very old method, which has been used for centuries. And by the way, one more thing, I must say that all alcohol, when it's distilled, is water white. How does the whiskey get the color?
Sorry, say again?
All alcohol is water white. Vodka, gin, everything is water white. But why does it get the color? Why does the dark rum gets dark color?
I think that's the impurities.
Why is that?
Okay, all alcohol is water white. Whiskey gets its color because they put that alcohol into cask which previously contained sherry. So the sherry transfers that color to them. And the dark rum, the white rum is nothing added, but the dark rum, when it's finished, they add a little bit of molasses in there. That's it. That's the only difference between this rum and that rum.
Let me tell you, and this is interesting because you just showed a commonality. You're saying that all alcohol is water white, but let me give you there's a lot of differences too, right? And a lot of differences come from preference, what you like, what you don't like. I'll give you a little anecdote. My father used to be a restaurateur. He owned the Murray House Hotel in Oakville for a while in the 80s. And I can tell you that we had I don't know if you guys remember this, but we had a beer strike somewhere in the mid 80s. I think it was 84 or so, that beer was just nowhere to be found in Ontario whatsoever. And a lot of bars and restaurants were starved from beer. And we ended up going down to the United States and buying cases and cases and cases, stocking up a van of beer to bring it up and have it here. And when we brought the beer over, patrons were coming over again, having a beer. They didn't care if it was American or whatever kind of beer it was. As long as it was beer, it was fine. So that water white thing again it was just something to drink. But I got to tell you something. When the strike ended, we couldn't give away the American beer. We were doing 2 and 3 and 4 for 1 deals, and nobody would buy it. So we got to see that, you know what, sometimes even though beer and other alcohol may seem alike, there is differences that people actually gravitate for. And you know what, that blue is much better than the old Milwaukees and Bucks out there.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Mario, thank you for that little bit of a memory. And I'm not going to admit to being old enough to have participated in that, although I might have some dim memory. But we do know, of course, that for decades, here in Canada, at least where we are talking from, the words American and beer do not belong in the same sentence. not whatsoever.
Gentlemen,
No. Let me continue, please.
Okay, sorry.
All of this talk in the past number of minutes has been a little too celebratory for my taste. And I think this podcast also ought to direct the conversation somewhat to the social trauma caused by the overconsumption of alcohol. Not to mention, I mean, just all, in many different facets of society. If I can direct the conversation that way, I think we ought to address it.
I would like to butt in on that regarding the health.
Gentlemen, we're getting close to our time limit. It would be a good way to end the discussion on more of a sober note, shall we say. But with regards to American beer, there's one thing I would like to say, and it's the main difference between American and Canadian beer is that the Americans use a lot more wheat in the making of their beer. And that gives them a more bland taste than the beers we have up here. That's the primary difference, plus the fact that American beer is more equivalent to water. With regards to the issue of alcohol abuse in society, that has been a major concern since the distillation of alcohol became much easier, starting about 300 or 400 years ago, when they figured out how to mass produce the stuff from distillates. In fact, about 125 to 150 years ago, there was a major movement for the abolition of alcohol. And it actually succeeded in the United States in about the 1921 to get the United States to adopt a law of banning all alcohol. Unfortunately, it did not succeed in what it was intended to do. People still drank. They brought alcohol in, and all it did was drive the trade in alcohol underground. Now, the consequences of that are still with us today, because it actually funded organized crime to a great extent. And we now have to deal with the consequences of all of that. So where do we go from here? Well, I think that our culture is a little more responsible in the use of alcohol than they were maybe 100 years ago. We don't necessarily drink to excess as we once did, but maybe self-responsibility isn't enough. Maybe there's other things we could do. For example, Andrew, do you have anything to suggest?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, societal attitudes have changed, and it's the result of concerted push from groups such as MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and governments as well. Our alcohol, our beer and wine and whiskey here in Canada is considerably more expensive than in the US. And that is because, of course, it's so heavily taxed, very heavily taxed. So it's double the price easily or more sometimes. And you know what? I don't mind in a way. I mean, when I'm paying at the cash register, I mind. But philosophically speaking, I don't mind because the government is not only trying to fill their coffers, which let's face it, they are, but they're also trying to remind us, I think bottom line is that, just make it that little more expensive, not much more expensive sometimes. And they're trying to moderate the purchase of it in some degree, and I think they are. I mean, it's not a no-brainer to invest nowadays in a carton of beer because it's going to cost you a lot, and in some ways that's a good thing. I don't know.
Let me add my final thoughts to this as well. And that is that, and I said this earlier, that everything in moderation is very important in anything we do. So on a very serious note, societal prohibitions many times have the opposite effect.
Right.
And they create more of a desire. It's human nature to want what you can't have. And in Greece, where I grew up, I can tell you that alcohol was never restricted by age or anything like that. And I grew up in a family that when we had a drink, we had a glass of wine at the dinner table. It wasn't, oh, you got to be 18 or 19 before you can actually drink that. I would have a glass of wine. That being said, there was a lot of respect for alcohol and the effects that can come out of it in a negative way. Society, especially in North America, when you do have prohibition to a certain age, kids when they come to that age, being 19 here in Canada, 21 in the United States, they will go binge drinking, or when they hit university, they will do it secretly in the dorms or wherever. So it creates the potential for drug driving. It creates the potential for misbehaving and abusing the drug, which it is a drug, and basically, creating issues. And MAD is absolutely 100% addressing very positively the bad effects that happen with alcohol and other drug abuse. So let me just finish by this. Let me just finish my thought with this. Always be respectful of what this is. Understand it, and drink only when it's safe. Only when you're in a social environment where you're not going to hurt anybody else or yourself. And I will leave it at that.
We'll give the final word to Sarab.
Oh, you're muted, Sarab.
Sarab, you're...
Yeah, thank you. All I want to say is I'm actually having a tug of war, weaning away from alcohol to cannabis for health reasons. It has made my liver go bad because I've been drinking whiskey without any water for a long time. I think my liver is affected to some extent. But if you want the psychoactive feeling, you can get it with cannabis in the right amount, equivalent amount. It has the same effect, but with less consequences, less health problems. There's never been a problem. And very soon, everything is going to moving to this side, because in the book of Aldous Huxley, The Brave New World, what they talk about is everybody's happy, they're standing on hills, there's no work because the robots are doing all the work. They're all wearing white clothes because there's no fashion. And everybody gets a pill, which the state gives them, which keeps them happy. They are totally in a different state of mind. They don't need to work, and they get fed also with a pill. And that's it. And we're heading towards that. This is a toxin which has to go away. We don't need to put it to change the state of mind. We have other things. Back to you. And thank you.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for watching our podcast or listening to it today. And we'll sign off here and give you a toast. And we join us with a toast with your favorite grog or tipple or whatever you wish to call it. And have a nice day.
Cheers.